Don't miss out on the games or concerts you want to see. Tickets are available now at Minnesota's very own Ticket King. Visit TicketKingOnline.com. Sports, theater, concerts, and more. TicketKingOnline.com or call 612-341-4131.
Sports chatter over beers with your friends is fun. Sports chatter over beers with the 1500 ESPN crew? That's even more fun. It's time for the Sports Over Beers podcast with Derek Wetmore and a cast of other brew lovers from 1500 ESPN.
Welcome to another episode of Sports Over Beers and Sports Over Beers TV. This is the third ever time we've done Sports Over Beers TV, and I keep saying that it's a bad idea, but we keep doing it, so I guess we'll continue to put this on the website in video form until people tell us that we should stop.
And see, there's
management.
There is the critical element. It's only that management hasn't yet seen the first two videos.
Right, exactly.
It's
bound to happen at some point.
There would not be a third video if they'd already seen the first two.
So that's Derek Wetmore. I'm Phil Mackey. And if you're watching the video right now, if you're just on the podcast, you can definitely check the video out at 1500ESPN.com. If you're just watching the video and you don't know where to find the podcast, you can subscribe to Sports Over Beers on iTunes or find it on 1500ESPN.com. But we are at Lucid Brewing right now, which is why you see all these silver things sort of in the background of us. But this is the Fantasy Football Draft Party, sponsored by Lucid Brewing and Red Cow, 1500 ESPN. We got Bo Mitchell, Anthony Maggio here, and the festivities are ongoing right now. But we spent some time a little earlier just plucking the brains of two of the fantasy football experts, gurus, freaks.
All of the above.
Geeks.
Actually, all of those apply. They are freaks and geeks, but they're also the resident fantasy football experts at 1500ESPN.com. They host their own fantasy football podcast for our network, the Fantasy Football Pants Party, which if you're
Pants are very much optional on this podcast.
Yeah, that's in the subhead, actually. I just hadn't gotten to that. But those are the guys to follow. Bo Mitchell, Anthony Maggio do a great job with the Pants Party podcast, and they're also doing weekly columns at 1500ESPN.com. I know they're appearing on your show, too, in the morning with Judd Zolgad.
I don't know why we do that, really. I mean, I don't know why we give those guys airtime on our radio show.
I was going to say the opposite. It's almost like a favor to you that they would grace your show with their presence.
It probably is. Now, you and I, admittedly, I am back in the fantasy baseball game for the first time in a couple of years. I used to be obsessed and really, really good at fantasy baseball.
Same here.
Used to put out my own spreadsheets and projections, and people would download them on my website.
In like a really gross way, I was obsessed with it.
It was, I used to sit in the back of college classes, actually, instead of taking notes from the lecturers, I would literally be making fantasy baseball trades.
Totally the same thing for me, except I wouldn't go to the classes. So I was sitting in my dorm room doing this.
As far as football goes, I don't think I've won a fantasy football league maybe my entire life.
Really? Oh.
I play in 2 or 3 leagues every single year, and as much as I think I know about football, I think there's a difference between knowing about football and then knowing how to win fantasy football leagues. You might argue that I don't know anything about either, but I know I particularly don't know anything about winning a fantasy football league, and so I am lighting money on fire every single year in these things, which is kind of why it's fun to have access to Maggio and Mitchell,
right?
Even though it hasn't helped in the last few years.
You beat me to the punch on that one, but actually that's where we're different. I've done a league with my buddies for 8 or 9 years, and I'm done with it now. I don't do fantasy football. Last year was my final year for a while, I think. But it's great having these guys inside. I won, I think we did, like I said, 8 or 9 years, and I won the championship 4 times in that
look
league.
at you.
But here's the thing.
Oh.
Here's the thing. It's like,
why are you doing this for a living then?
It's like,
you should be like,
no,
you should be doing what they're doing for a living.
This is me running away from the bear, because I know I'm not faster than any bear in North America.
Did Judd just get in the camera shot? Do you see Judd just creepy fingers just like setting a beer down on the corner?
It's weird that he's setting it down, though. I feel like that's kind of...
It's counterintuitive to what you normally would be doing, yes.
But I was going to say that it's like outrunning the bear. I don't actually have to be any faster than the bear. And in this case, I don't actually have to be good at fantasy football. Yeah. I just have to be a little bit better than my buddies and get a little lucky. So that's my whole story.
That's a good point, yeah. So we admittedly kind of screwed this up. We thought we had a half hour of golden stuff from Maggio and Mitchell, and we forgot to turn the microphones on at the right time. So what you're going to see here if you're watching the video is basically me asking Anthony Maggio, if you draft number 1 overall in a fantasy league this year, you would be an idiot not to pick blank. and Bo Mitchell's answer got cut off before that. So he, for the record, said Adrian Peterson.
Yeah.
He would say, if you're an idiot if you don't draft Adrian Peterson number 1 overall.
And he addresses some of that stuff in their weekly columns on 1500ESPN.com. You can find all of that stuff too. But instead of starting over and shooting the whole thing again, we opted instead to just keep drinking beer and keep doing what we're doing at Lucid Brewing. It's just an easy decision. Was not really difficult.
So if you're watching on the video, this is going to be we're going to try and make this as least awkward as possible on the video transition. If you're listening on the podcast, it's just going to sound like a very seamless radio transition. So that's Derek Wetmore. I'm Phil Mackey, and this is us now magically being joined by Bo Mitchell and Anthony Maggio to talk some fantasy football.
Maggio,
you would be an idiot if you didn't draft who number 1 overall?
I'm going to call this a trick question because the legit answer is Le'Veon Bell, but really you should be trying to trade out of that spot. The reason being a lot of the things that Bo just said. What we have going on this year is a situation where I could make a case for as many as 5 running backs to be the number 1 guy.
Would you put Lynch in that discussion too, or
6 really?
CJ
if you
Anderson,
wanted to call, I do have C.J. Anderson at 5 over Marshawn Lynch at 6. But what happens is, like, if you were to comp this to an auction draft, you want to get in the middle of a tier. You know what I mean? Because the first guy that's thrown out in an auction draft in a specific tier, regardless of position, is always going to be really high. And the last guy in that tier is probably going to be the most expensive. So you kind of want the middle guy. Whereas in a draft situation, you really want to be at the kind of back end of those tiers versus the middle of those tiers. So this year, the place to really be drafting is number 4 or 5 because you don't have to make that running back decision. It gets made for you, and then you're picking again before
and then you're
everybody
picking
else.
earlier. Yeah.
that was one of the other questions I have is if you're not in the kind of advantageous position to, whether you're in the top spot or trading back from it. So it's interesting to hear you say you want to kind of be middle of that first round. What happens if you're at the end of one of the snake draft rounds? Say you've got a 10-man league and you've got, you know, most of these running backs, of course, are going to be off the board, and you've got to sort of make your decisions then. I've been in this spot before, guys, where there's a player that you really want that falls to you, and sometimes you just have to have the discipline to know that you're not going to pick again for another 18 picks and know, like, geez, I've sort of got to set myself up. How do you guys approach that? Is there a certain tactic that you have as you go into knowing you're going to be late in the round and then you're going to get 2 picks, and then it's a desert for a little while?
Yeah, if I'm at the end of a round, if I'm at picking 9th, 10th, something like that this year, the top probably 6, 7, 8 running backs may be off the board by that time. In fact, we were talking about average draft position again today, and we've done mock drafts and real drafts already, and typically in that top 10, you will have 6 to 8 running backs go. Well, the drop-off kind of starts there at running back, so the question is then, well, do I take like the 7th, 8th, 9th best running back, or do I take, you know, maybe the best wide receiver, or Rob Gronkowski's being taken there, or even Aaron Rodgers? I know you're against that, Maj, but that's probably where I would go. I'd take the 1st or 2nd best wide receiver. I might think about taking Rob Gronkowski there, end of 1st, beginning of 2nd, or even Aaron Rodgers.
Is that because you think you can get running back that's comparable later?
Yeah, that top tier of running backs, to me, really, they're going to be gone by that 9th, 10th. I mean, if one of them, if Marshawn Lynch slides for some reason, sure, I'll take him.
Okay.
But I'm assuming all those guys are going to be gone. And then, I think there is a gap there where, you know, the next 15 guys are fairly comparable, and you can get one of them in round 3.
I feel like there should be leagues that reward touchdown celebrations. Where, like, if you get Gronk and he delivers a massive spike that deflates a football, that's like 3 extra points.
Like
you know.
John Brown is the guy who really has the reputation as being the best touchdown celebrator. So.
What does John Brown do? John Brown, you said?
Yeah,
wide receiver,
Brown,
Cardinals?
Wide receiver,
so what's his deal?
Well, he's very unique in his celebrations.
Which is difficult when they don't really allow you to, you know, you can't work with props anymore.
He's so short they can't even see him, so they can't find him.
He'd fly up draft boards if that were a prop.
Give me, start with Maj, give me a player that you, or maybe multiple players, that you will not touch under almost any circumstance. And it can't be like
touch, or...
physically touch. That you will not.
I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you.
But it can't. And don't tell me Kelvin Benjamin because he has a torn ACL. Give me player that's healthy, that you will not touch because you hate this player?
Here's what we'll do. So Bo and I had a similar conversation in the Pants Party today. So rather than rehash those specific guys, I will direct people to the Pants Party for that.
Wow,
to
look
bump
at
up our
this.
listens.
You're
what I
teasing
will
a
do
podcast
is
within a
go
podcast.
to. It's like Inception in here. What I will do is go. I'm going to go to the wide receiver position because we talked running backs. There are two guys that I will mention: T.Y. Hilton and Deshaun Jackson. Now, there's no reason behind. Like, I'm not just against these guys. Like, talent-wise, I think T.Y. Hilton, especially, all the talent in the world. And at the end of the season, these guys are going to be ranked by when you're looking at points scored for the season. They're T.Y. Hilton's going to be a borderline number 1. Deshaun Jackson probably going to be a low end number 2. But the fluctuations in the scoring really make it difficult for me as someone who's a more conservative fantasy player, because the way when I look at it, I can set myself up real nice early and then make moves in season to get myself number 1, because I'm not trying to be number 1 in week 1. I'm trying to be number 1 at the end of the season. So I don't want to put myself in a position where I'm shooting myself in the foot early and just scrambling to get back even in the mix. Guys like Deshaun Jackson and T.Y. Hilton, they can help you win by 30 in any week, but they can also do nothing for you. And I don't need to win by 30. I need to win by 1. And where these guys go average draft position-wise, I would rather not have to construct my team around a volatile asset like that and pigeonhole myself into a place where I've got to get, these very consistent guys. And, like I said, love their talent, but on a week-to-week basis, I can't trust playing them, to that extent to where they're drafted.
You're a baseball guy. Can I make a baseball analogy here?
I don't think so.
I think this is like the 2015 Twins, where everyone hits 250, nobody gets on base, and they rely for the first time ever on 3-run homers and doubles to score runs. And if they don't get a 4 spot in the second inning, they might not score the whole game.
Yep.
So this is like the Oakland Athletics when they never stole and they never manufactured runs, where they might score 10.
Yeah.
But then they might strike out 12 times and give you nothing.
And over the course of a 162-game season, that's okay. But in a 16-week season, that is not okay.
And fantasy football season's even shorter than that, because you got to get to the playoffs before you even have a chance at week 14, 15, 16.
It's like a team of Adam Dunns.
So those guys,
that's a great point.
So
or
those
Rob
guys,
Deere.
I would take
Rob Deere and Adam
Dave Dingman.
I would take Deshaun Jackson as my wide receiver 3. I would take T.Y. Hilton as my wide receiver 2, because I'm getting value in that based on what their ultimate upside is. But drafting them where they're ultimately going to be scoring-wise, for me, is not a smart play.
Bo, who do you hate?
Yeah, I was going to mention Deshaun Jackson. He sprung to mind. LaShawn McCoy, we talked about him earlier today on the podcast.
I'm going to just fall over next time.
Apparently, they're still brewing beer here, which is good. I think that's a good thing.
Coming.
How rude are they to be brewing beer at a brewery? Well, we're trying to do a podcast right now. This is ridiculous.
Speaking of.
Yeah, right.
We got an empty.
Well, Maggio's going to need another raspberry ale, right? Is that what you were nursing here?
It's raspberry something. It wasn't
raspberry
ale,
blonde.
Blonde.
Rudy Tooty, fresh and fruity?
Yeah. No, that's yours. It was delicious, though.
You thought you were maybe going to get away with drinking that on the Sports Over Beers podcast without being called out for it. And
just give me a straight hops, please. Yeah. I want all your
I'm
hops.
all in on the fruity beers with you. I'm all in on the fruity beers. There's no shame. Who do you hate, Bo? Deshaun Jackson.
And McCoy?
LaShawn McCoy, Alfred Morris, Jay Cutler, Bears guy, Joe Flacco.
There's a hot take, Jay Cutler.
Yeah.
Well, Jay Cutler's not a terrible fantasy quarterback. He's just a bad quarterback.
But you get punished for turnovers.
This series his receivers are dropping like flies. So I've actually got him on one of my dynasty teams, and I'm not happy about it. So
this is from multiple years ago when you thought that there was.
Yeah, I've had Cutler on this squad for probably 4 years. Yeah, so
that's a bigger picture question. Do you guys prefer the ones fantasy leagues where you're redrafting every year, or do you want to have some stake in the dynasty so that hey, if I'm out of it, I'm still invested? Let's skip over the week-to-week fantasy leagues, because for those purposes you're always back in it, right? I mean, clock resets. Yeah. But for the purposes of a league with your buddies, for example, you've got whether it's a work league or your friends, whatever the case is. Do you want to have stake invested in future years, or is that kind of like, man, that's a lot of investment. I'd rather wipe the slate clean at draft day?
First, go ahead,
I like to do a mix of both. I'm in two or three dynasty leagues. I lose track, but I like to do a mix of both for both reasons. I actually really enjoy dynasty leagues for football and baseball. So, but if you're in a position where your dynasty league is getting a little long in the tooth, and you've got Jay Cutler on it, then you might prefer the redraft league.
Sure.
For the purposes of actual season-long play, I prefer Dynasty 10 times out of 10 because there's always some kind of stake in it for everyone, whether you're playing for a championship
trading
now
for the future,
or playing to make your team better for next year. Whereas in a redraft league, you know, when your top two guys get hurt. Last year I had Calvin Johnson and Brandon Marshall as my first 2 picks in the league. That team was out of it pretty quick.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think Doug Martin was my third pick. You know, it was like just the team was horse crap. And at that point, I do my best to keep invested, but when I'm in 5 leagues and have other things going on, and that league I know sucks, my team, not the league, I'm not going to spend as much time cruising the waiver wire trying to make things better.
Sure.
Have you guys, because I think in the last 2 or 3 years, like DraftKings.com and some of these FanDuel
I've heard of
have exploded like crazy, not just for football, but for even daily fantasy baseball and basketball leagues.
Yeah.
Have you guys developed yet in football overall, general, overarching strategies? Because you can't just go in and pick Aaron Rodgers, Calvin Johnson, Le'Veon Bell. They make you maybe load up with 2 or 3 superstars, or you can go with a team of more middle of the pack. Have you figured out a general strategy yet for winning these types of
Well, are you
leagues?
talking about like the type of games you enter, like tournaments versus
So
50-50s versus head-to-heads, or roster construction?
Let's say you're doing one of the weekly guaranteed prize pool,
Sure.
$1 million 1 week, and they guarantee a prize
have not
pool,
won
and they
that
pay
yet,
out
by the
15%
way.
of the pool. You have not won one of those
Not yet.
Otherwise, you wouldn't be here doing this right now.
I would be here. I'd be drinking more.
When you do, Maj, call me and we'll split a case of raspberry ales for sure. The raspberry blonde.
Like, are you more of a load up on, all right, I'm going to go spend my money on Aaron Rodgers, Calvin Johnson, and Le'Veon Bell type players, and then 8 scrubs, or balance it out more? Or do we not really know what the right strategies are in general because it's so new in the last few years?
For a tournament, I'm a guy that subscribes to gameplay, game theory more so than the players themselves in terms of how I go about it. So if I'm in one of those guaranteed prize pool tournaments, I'm in it with a lot of people. And so you need to do more than pick the right 2 or 3 guys. You need to pick the guys that no one else is going to have. Because if you're picking an all-star team, let's just say if it was unlimited funds, everyone would pick the best players and nobody would win anything. It'd be a big old tie. You need to find those guys that not only are going to be good, but that nobody else is on.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot different from, say, playing in a 50-50 or head-to-head. I tend to skew towards the 50-50 leagues when I play for football. I'm probably going to get into more tournament play this year, but with tournament play, I like to fire a lot of bullets. I like to throw a lot of lineups in, whereas the 50-50s, I'll get 3 because in that, you actually want to swim with the stream a little bit. You want to get those guys that are going to be highly owned and then pick out those, snipe those 1 or 2 other guys where you've got, I like to think, being that we are studious in this, I've got a little bit of an informational advantage because I spend more time with it. So just in doing that, I like to think more often than not I'm going to find those guys and be able to finish in the top half and get my money back in that.
How many lineups do you set a week for daily fantasy, typically?
Well,
and do you think you have
football,
a problem?
For football, last year it was like 3 a week.
All right.
For baseball, though, I've done as many as like 6 or 7 in a day. And I'm not a grinder like the guys who do. I mean, there's guys that set 30, 40 lineups, more.
You're like Jesse Spano on caffeine pills.
Well,
just grab another shot of this caffeine-infused beer here. Bo, if you're starting, let's say you're in a season-to-season league and it's an auction, and it's not a keeper league, it's not a dynasty league, it's a straight auction, and the roster's reset at the beginning of the year. Or even, let's say you're even keeping a player or 2, but for the most part, most players are back in the auction pool. Mm-hmm. How do you win an auction? And not win, because it's all in the eye of the beholder, but how do you overspend on a $200 cap on one guy you really like and then wait for an hour and a half? Or what do you go in thinking your game plan is usually?
No, I tend to take more of the silo approach where my auction budget is evenly distributed from top to bottom rather than the pyramid or the studs and scrubs approach where you blow your wad on Le'Veon Bell, and
you
then
can say that on the Sports Over Beers podcast. By the way, I checked.
Did we get a ruling?
Yeah, no, I checked. I confirmed that. I think we're good.
Rather than getting 1 or 2 very expensive players and then getting a bunch of cheaper players, it reduces risk obviously because if that very expensive player gets injured, then you're pretty much screwed. And I also like, in terms of managing my budget throughout the auction, I don't like to spend a lot early. Maybe if there's a guy that comes up early that's going off the board for a pretty good value, I'll take advantage of that. But I tend to like to be the guy who has the most or close to the most money left about halfway through the auction.
Sure.
Because then you control the board.
Right.
Problem is, don't hold on to the money too long, because then at the end, you're spending $9 on a player that you could have gotten for $2.
Sure. It's happened to me multiple times where, and I'm kind of like you, where I'll bid guys up early so that other teams can
you have to
spend
do
a large,
that.
but then I'll either forget to cross somebody off. You'll get an hour and a half in, and you'll on your list it'll be, holy, are you really? Wow. Holy
Why is
cow,
Adrian Peterson still on the
exactly.
board?
Why is Calvin Johnson still on the board? Does anyone else know that he's still
Oh,
on the
I know
board?
I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him for
Calvin
$4.
Johnson. Yeah, he was thrown out the third player,
Yeah.
actually, and you were in the bathroom.
Yeah.
So.
Maggio, you addressed this in a column on 1500 ESPN this week about talking about the proportionality of your budgets for positions.
Yeah.
How do you approach that? What's your general overview on like breaking down your budget, basically?
It's math.
Science.
I was told there would be no math.
Yeah.
The my strategy changes a little bit based on the size of your team. So the deeper the bench I have, the more I'm going for a studs and scrubs approach, because I've got more bullets to fire at the scrubs to get one or two guys right.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So if it's a short bench, I'm more with Bo. I instead of getting the equivalent of a first-round guy and a second-round guy, I'd rather have like 5 third-round guys. You know what I mean? To fill out your starting lineup and then have some depth. But yeah, so when I'm getting back to your question about proportionality, I'll base it more upon my starting lineup versus my full roster. So it'll be like I want to spend X amount of dollars on my starting running back position.
Sure.
But if I'm willing to change that at the drop of a hat, if I see the valuations and players are different from what I thought they were going in, because I think I said this in my column too, I spend very little time preparing for any auctions I'm in, because I don't want to feel like I'm trying to get myself back to something I planned for. I want to be much more fluid and be able to react to things that are happening. As I said, people have asked me to put dollar values on my cheat sheet. I'm not helping you. I'm hurting you by doing that.
Right,
You don't want me to do that.
You get sort of pigeonholed into what you think a player is worth.
Because then you're trying to make adjustments based on what other guys went for, and the market is dependent not only upon where that guy is on your cheat sheet, but where you are in the draft, where he falls in a tier, how many players are still left in that tier, and how many starting positions still are left to be filled. So there's just way too much going on for you to try to harken back to some kind of baseline, because ultimately you're trying to figure stuff out in that respect when you're not paying attention to the other things you should be trying to figure out, and ultimately hurting yourself.
Give us your 2 favorite 2015, at least at the time of this recording anyways, which is still 3 weeks before the regular season. Your 2 favorite quote-unquote sleepers, which is such a ridiculously cliche term in fantasy football, but the 2 guys that you find yourselves constantly finding valuable either in the mid or late rounds or wherever, even if it's a guy at the end of the first round.
Well,
give me 2 each.
Maggio's not going to be sleeping for a little while. He just had a couple of shots of this.
Shots of whatever this
coffee,
This one's-
cold
we're not
press
opening another
coffee.
one. We're not opening another one.
If you did, we would be pulling consecutive all-nighters.
I'll be drinking this tomorrow morning when I get up after this, and I'm nursing my hangover thanks to Lucid Brewing.
The sleeper picks, boys.
We've talked about a lot of them on the show already. I'll say... Well, I won't take Frank Gore. That's probably Maggio's. I'll take Doug Martin. Tampa Bay, last couple of years has been awful.
No, just kidding.
Been horrible the last 2 years. He's dropped 10 pounds. Apparently looks much quicker, much better shape. Looked really good training camp.
That's what they said about Maj before the fantasy season, too.
I'm buying the hype. I'm definitely bullish on Anthony Maggio.
Put your shirt back down. That's
Definitely bullish.
He's still going pretty low in drafts, and if you can find a guy who looks anything like a feature running back, jump all over him this year.
Sure.
My deep sleeper this year at wide receiver is Chris Conley, a guy for the Chiefs, a rookie who has almost no barriers to starting for the Chiefs this year and to line up across from Jeremy Maclin, who's going to get all the attention along with Travis Kelce. And Chris Conley has the size, he has the speed, he has the attitude, the work. He has the whole thing. They just didn't feature him very much in college, so he dropped in the draft. I think this guy is going to surprise a lot of people, and you can get him in the last round of your draft or pick him up in week 1 or 2 because no one else is going to draft him.
You missed the opportunity for a Ghostbusters reference there. You could have said he has the tools and he has the talent.
That could have
been done.
And then you could have dropped your mic, and you could have gone and jumped into one of these big silver things and gone swimming for the rest of the day.
That could have filled our quota. No. You get one take on the Sports Over Beers podcast.
All right, Maggio, we have a crowd to entertain here in 2 minutes. So give us your 2 sleepers and let's go entertain a crowd.
All right.
Probably 2 bears coming up here.
Well, no, it's hard. See, sleepers is a tough thing for me because there's
Jay
so much information
Cutler.
out there now that it's like.
Okay, there's no such thing as sleepers.
It's like we did a Sports Over Beers.
Undervalued
Well,
guys.
2 weeks ago we did the old the Vikings sleepers podcast.
Yeah.
Where everyone's picking them to be a sleeper, so they're no longer a sleeper anymore. Everyone's picking them to be sleepers. So.
Right. Yeah. If you want value, especially at the running back position, take the guys like Trey Mason, like Ryan Matthews, those really high upside handcuffs, because these are guys that are actually going to, like in Mason's case, probably be a feature back for a month, maybe longer.
Yep.
But if you beat the Gurley owner to him, then you've got a nice piece of trade bait there, especially if the Gurley owner loses a couple games and is desperate to do something. And with Ryan Matthews, I talked about today, on your show with Judd, and he's probably the most valuable handcuff right now in fantasy, just based on the fact that they run so many plays, and we know there's going to be some kind of split of duties. We don't know how much, but enough that 2 guys are going to have value in that offense. And sticking with that theme, and a guy you like, David Cobb.
Yep.
He's I think that's at worst a 50-50 situation, and frankly, I think Cobb might win that job. Now,
he doesn't have a great running back to beat out for that job,
and there's not a high ceiling there. I'm not saying he's going to show up and be a high-end running back too, but he is definitely a guy that has the high-end flex play appeal,
and you can get him late.
Yeah,
really late.
All right. Hey, that was a heck of a talk, you guys.
That was fun.
That was a heck of a talk right there.
It was fun, although I would say that recording a podcast did interrupt me a little bit from drinking my beer, so probably going to take care of that.
Didn't interrupt me at all. I was drinking.
I'm out.
I think probably take care of that now that as long as we're at Lucid anyways, and if we're done with the Sports Over Beers podcast, I feel like that's probably an apropos
and
time
since
to
I know
refill.
you have to go cover a Twins game right now, which probably requires
I need a couple
few
more.
for later on.
Yes,
Yep.
absolutely.
Yep. All right, Maggio, Bo Mitchell, find these guys on the Pants Party podcast.
Thanks,
iTunes,
boys.
1500ESPN.com.
Yeah, this was fun. Let's do it again.
We'll catch you next time on Sports Over Beers.